Six Nations success, folks. How well does this transfer into Rugby World Cup results? We'll go through all the Rugby World Cups from Six Nations back to 2003, because that 2003 England side is drawing a few comparisons this year to this current Irish crop in 2023, namely the fact that both these sides got Grand Slams, number one sides in the world. So they seem to have a lot about them, but we'll go through them. You guys can let us know your thoughts. Thanks to Junaid for the idea for this video. With me off on holiday for a month, I figured this is a good one to get done before I jump on a plane. So let's start back in 2003. Obviously, as I said, England, pretty bloody good side back in 2003, weren't they? They win the Grand Slam in the Six Nations, as I said, pretty all-conquering. And then they get a mixture of southern and northern opponents at the World Cup. They beat South Africa in the pool. And then in terms of knockout games, they face Wales in the quarterfinal, France in the semi-final, and then hosts Australia in the final. So Grand Slam winners, they beat all comers at the World Cup. Pretty bloody good England side. The next World Cup is 2007, and this is where you've got France as your Six Nations champions. Now they still managed to make the knockout stages. They did lose to Argentina in the pool stage, but then they managed to knock out Ireland. So they managed to, from that pool of death, still managed to get out of their pool. They famously beat New Zealand in the quarterfinal, but then lost to England and the semi, and they had also lost to England in the Six Nations. So despite the fact they won the Six Nations, England was the team that had stopped them from getting a Grand Slam in that Six Nations. So maybe that's a year where England had the wood over France. I don't remember back that far. England would go on to be runners-up in that World Cup despite finishing third in the Six Nations. So one of those nations that kind of overachieved, I guess, or at least achieved better than their Six Nations form would have suggested. Now the next one is 2011, and this is where we get a flip on its head, because previously we had England knocking out Six Nations champions France. This time it's France who will knock out Six Nations champions England. So England also without a Grand Slam. They beat Argentina and Scotland in their pool, but then lose to France in the quarterfinal, like I mentioned. Different story, though, is that they had actually beaten France in that Six Nations campaign. I think they had lost the last game to Ireland, had England in that Six Nations. But yeah, France, again, it's another side who didn't do as well in the Six Nations. They came second, and then they finished runners-up in the actual competition. Some would argue they should have won that one down here in NZ, but that's 2011. Then we move on to 2015. Now, 2015, we've got Ireland as our Six Nations champions, and we know the story with Ireland and Rugby World Cup. So obviously, it's quarterfinal exit for this. Again, not a Grand Slam Irish side, but still, the Six Nations champions. They beat France and they beat Italy in the pool stages, so two northern opponents. But then when they come up against Argentina in the quarterfinal, they go out. England, Wales, and France were the top four teams in that Six Nations of 2015, and to be honest, none of them did that flash, because that's the year where it's the four rugby championship teams making the semi-finals. So Wales and France going out in the pool, and England at home went out in the pool stages. Did I say pool stages for Wales and France? Quarterfinals for Wales and France, pool stage for England. Now the most recent one is Wales in 2019, again with a Grand Slam. They beat Australia in their pool. They also had Fiji in there as well, but they managed to beat them both. They beat France in a pretty hard-fought quarterfinal, but then lost to South Africa, who were the eventual champions, in the semi-final. So England also were second in that Six Nations and finished runners-up in the competition. So interestingly, you got a couple of times, or three times at least, where a team who wasn't the top team in the Six Nations made the final. As I mentioned, England in 2019, France in 2011, England in 2007. None of those teams, they were either third or second in the Six Nations, still managed to get through to a final. The winners themselves, yeah, there's a few exits here. Semi-final 2019, quarterfinal, semi-final, and then a final. So it doesn't actually bode that well, does it? Very few of the Six Nations teams who've won it have gone on, like the Six Nations champions, have gone on to make the final. But in terms of Grand Slams, the two Grand Slams on the board, you've at least got a semi-final and a final. So in theory, you could say this Irish side should be at least in line for a semi-final based on recent history. But as always, these videos are mostly a bit of fun because that's all in the past, and it's all about the sides which come out on the field to see what kind of performance they put in. The history will not decide their future, but then again, there is certainly a bit of extra weight of expectation on Irish side going into a quarterfinal, no doubt. But yeah, there you go, folks. I thought that was kind of an interesting quick look. What do you guys reckon? Do you think you can see a potential situation where a runner-up in the Six Nations, like France in 2023, has the potential to do better than the reigning champion? They're both on the same side of the draw. So it could be an interesting one where they meet each other in a quarterfinal. Who knows? But that does seem to be the trend, if there is anyone. But someone eventually, you would say, is going to replicate that 2003 side and go on to match Six Nations glory with World Cup success. I should also say it's a bit of a different one for the Six Nations compared to the Rugby Championship because there is that huge gap between the Six Nations and the World Cup. It's maybe one of the advantages for the Rugby Championship to get the competitive competition later on in the year and then, I don't want to say ease on into a World Cup, but then kind of continue that momentum, whereas the Six Nations sides have kind of got to go hard, then go back to club rugby and then build that momentum again. But anyway, England done it before, so we know it can be done. You guys let us know your thoughts, and I will talk to you guys again soon.